In this little lesson, we're going to be looking at the basics of if statements, part 1. I've broken if statements down into quite a lot of different sections. It might feel like I'm going into way too much detail, but if statements are really complicated for beginner programmers, and people make a lot of mistakes. So by going over some of these key mistakes that people make and go over things in a lot of detail, hopefully it'll make it easier for you to learn the harder code later on. So let's look at the basic structure of an if statement. To begin with, an if statement is a bit more complicated than the input and print and variables we've already looked at. Straight away, you can see it's broken over more than one line. You have the condition, which is the parts that I've just circled in yellow. The condition is a test. This test will either be true or false. So here I've got a variable color, and if the color that's inside this variable, or the text that's inside it, is equal to the text red, then that condition becomes true. If it's anything else, the condition becomes false. When the condition's true, it will run the next line of code, which I've kind of dashed. If the condition is false, that code will not run. So let's have a bit of keyword focus. The condition here will evaluate to true or false, and we call that Boolean. Okay, it returns a Boolean value, true or false. When text has been kind of moved in a little bit like this, we call that indentation. For if statements to work correctly, you need to indent all the code that needs to run when that condition is true. Indentation can be achieved by pressing space, which is, you can do it that way. But I find that a little bit tricky to manage later on when your programs get much bigger. Or you can use the tab key. Most people have never used the tab key before. If you're not sure where it is, you can find it just below the escape key, which is in the top left hand corner, and it looks like it's got two arrows pointing backwards and forwards. So it kind of looks like this. So you've got an arrow pointing this way, and then another arrow pointing this way. And that's the tab key, and they're kind of underneath each other. For those of you who are familiar with flowcharts, you can think of an if statement like a decision box in a flowchart. Decision box in flowcharts will have a yes or no coming out of them. This is equivalent to true and false. So if the condition is true or yes, then it's going to jump from here over to here. So it's going to run the process box here. So does the color equal to red? Yes. Display, you have selected red. That's exactly the same as this code. Here I've got my condition, my test, my decision, and if that decision is true or yes, then it runs this code here. So these two are equivalent to each other. I will come back onto this table in the next video in a bit more detail, but I just wanted to introduce it now. When we have if statements and we have a condition, we can use any of the following. In today's session, we're going to be focusing only on this equals one, which is two equals signs next to each other. But we could also use not equals, less than, greater than, less than or equal, or greater than. Now, for those of you who are familiar with maths, you probably already have heard of greater than, less than. Less than or equal to and greater than or equal to in maths is kind of written more like this. Okay, less than or equal to. In computer science, we don't really have that key on the keyboard, which is why we kind of put them next to each other. If you write something like this, then that's wrong. Okay, you can't put the equal sign first. You must always put less than, equals, or greater than, equals. Here are some codes that has already been written. On line 1, we are asking the user to enter a color. From the previous lesson, we learned that input will request or prompt the user to enter some text, and this is the question they'll be given. Input will then return a string, which then must be assigned into a variable. In this case, the variable is called color. This single equals means assignment. Now, beginner programmers do get very confused between a single equals and a double equals, because we are not very familiar with using single equals in the way programming uses it. So single equals in programming means assignment, which means it takes whatever is on the right hand side and places it into the variable on the left. So it runs the code on the right first. Whatever is produced by that code is then stored into a variable or stored into memory using the assignment operator. Double equals essentially is an equality check which will always return true or false. So line 2 is going to take whatever is inside the variable color, compare it to the string red. If whatever was in the variable color is the text red, then it will display this code. Otherwise, it won't. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to type in the color red, hit enter, and you can see it says you have entered, or sorry, you've selected red. So because I entered the word red, what happened is this produced the word red and got assigned to the variable color. Because color has the value of red in it, it assigns it and then it will print it out. If I enter the color blue instead, if I run this code again and type in blue, you can see it now says you've selected blue. So this check here becomes false because color is no longer red. However, color is blue, so it returned the value blue. Let's consider the exact same code again. I've now run this code in a website called Python Tutor, and what this website allows us to do is step through line by line to see what the code is doing. So I'm currently on the line color equals input. So it's now asking me to enter input. So I'm going to enter the color blue. I'm then going to click on submit to enter it. Now we're on the color equals red. So notice here I've got a variable color which has the value blue in it. So the variable color does not equal red. So when I press next, you can see it jumps over the code and goes straight to line 4. So line 3 is not run at all. If the condition of an if statement is false, it will not run the code inside the if statements. If I now run this again, color equals blue, well, color does equal blue. So you see it runs line 5. And there we have the right output. Let's go back and run this code again. So I'm just going to restart this code. 1 second. There we go. So I'm going to enter a color. This time I'm going to type in yellow and press submit. Now the color is yellow, so it's not equal to red. So it's going to skip over line 3 and not run it. But it's not blue either, so it's going to skip over line 5. So line 5 and line 3 both are not run, and the reason for that is because none of those equality checks, none of those checks became true. So here I've got some code with some deliberate errors. Now I'm going to run this code straight away, and you can see with the error down here, it says color equals blue, invalid syntax, and it's pointing to the equal sign. Now on the face of it, this code looks fine because I have the variable on one side, I have the text I'm comparing it to. However, a single equals in Python means assignment. Now in order to get this working, we need to use the equality check, which is 2 equals. So that now has fixed that line of code. Let's run it again. So now it says invalid syntax again. And notice it's pointing to the end of the text yellow. When we have a condition in Python, we need to always end the if statement using a colon. The reason for this is because I might use more than one condition, and Python needs to know when I've finished adding conditions. So I'm going to run this code again, and you can see it's now running the code. Brilliant, excellent. So I'm going to type in the colour red. But now I've got an error again. It says name red is not defined. If we look at the code on line 2, where the error is, we can see it says colour equals red. Well, that's very similar to the other lines where I've got colour equals blue and colour equals yellow, but with one big difference, I forgot the quotation marks. As far as Python's concerned, it's trying to compare the variable colour to the variable red, which is very different to comparing the variable colour to the text red. So to fix that problem, I simply need to put quotation marks around it. Let's run the code one last time. I'm going to type in the colour blue and run it. Now it's working. So those 3 errors are some of the most common errors people get when they first start using basic if statements. So to summarise those 3 key mistakes from the previous video. If you forget to include quotation marks on a string, it considers it to be a variable, and thus it will say not defined. So if you ever have an if statement saying a variable is not defined or a name error, then it's normally because you forgot the quotation marks. If you get syntax error, okay, do check the following 2 things. First of all, have you forgotten the colon? That's a very, very common mistake to do because it's not something you usually would put at the end of a sentence. It's something you need to remember. And secondly, and this is one mistake I see time and time again, even with more experienced programmers, forgetting to use 2 equal signs instead of just 1. So a single equal sign, remember, is assignment. 2 equal sign together is an equality check. Okay, and when we're doing if statements, we want 2 equal signs. Now it's your chance to do some practice. Here I've got some code for you to type in, and the first task simply is to type this code in and run it. When you do so, it will look like very little has happened. It will ask you for the input, but nothing will be displayed after that. This might confuse you initially, okay? The reason why I want you to run it before putting a print command in is just to make sure you've typed it out correctly. Once you have typed it out, you need to display the variable points. Now we've looked at how to display things already using the print commands. So look back to previous videos if you're not sure how to do that. If you're really stuck on this task, I've got a model answer to it on coming up in this video. Then to finish this off, you need to enter 2 more if statements. The way to do it is to copy and paste one of these if statements, both lines, and tweak it. And you do this twice. Now you may wish to pause the video now and have a go at this task. If you've had a go at the task or got stuck in this task, then I'm now going to go over the model answer. So here's a worked example of the previous task. If I run this code straight away after entering it, it will ask me to enter a grade. So I'm going to enter gold, which is one of the grades, and notice nothing gets printed. Now, some students will then think, well, my code's not working, it's clearly broken because nothing's been displayed. However, the code is working absolutely fine because we don't have any print statements. This is the reason why it's not printing out. So to fix that, it's really simple. I just need to put a print in there. So I've added a print line saying print you have comma points. So we're going to run that code. This time I'm going to type in gold, and what should happen is it says you have 3. Now to make this a bit more user friendly, I might put in points as a string. Now notice that I've got a variable called points, and I've got a string called points, or string with the value with the text points inside it. So when I run this, we'll see the difference. I'll type in gold again. You can see it's now outputting it in a much nicer way. So there's a big difference between not having quotation marks, which Python will interpret as a variable, to having quotation marks where Python will refer to it as a string. Okay, so the next step was to add 2 more if statements. Now, a common mistake students will then make is to add 2 if statements underneath it like this. So I'm going to put in the silver and the bronze and put 2 and 1. and I'm going to run this code. Now, when I test it with gold, you can see it works perfectly. I'm going to run this code again, and I type in bronze. Now, it should say you have 1 point. But you can see it says you have 0 points. Now, again, people might think, well, my code is broken. Well, actually, it is in this case. And the problem is quite simple. The print has to come last. Because if you think about the order of the code that's being run, first of all, it's going to run these two if statements. Brilliant, for platinum gold. It then does the print and then checks for silver and bronze. Because we've already printed before we get to here, we get this error. Some people might then try and fix this by copy and pasting this line here. Well, that won't work either, because when I run it and I enter bronze, you can see it says you have 0 points, you have 0 points. Well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Oh, I can't spell bronze, that's why. Bronze. There we go. You say it says 0 points and 1 point. Okay. So all I need to do, quite simply, is only have one print statement and make sure it's the last thing that happens in this program. That way, it does all the if statement checks first and then does it. This is the final solution. However, I'm going to show you one last thing, because it's a very common mistake. I'm just going to make one tiny change. I've now indented the last print statement so it's inside the bronze. Now, when I run this code and I type in bronze, you can see it works perfectly. However, if I run this again, oops, if I run this again and type in silver, you can see there's no output. And the reason for this is because this print's not running. So I'm going to take this code and I'm going to run it in Python tutor. So when I visualize this execution, okay, I'm going to press next. I'm going to enter silver and submit. So press next. You see it jumps over the platinum because it's not platinum. It jumps over gold because it's not gold. It will run the silver one because it is silver, because the grade, it has the value of silver. And then it skips over both lines here, 10 and 11. So both 10 and 11 are not going to be run. However, the print that I want it to do is on line 11. The reason it skips over that line is because it thinks it's inside the if statement. So to fix that, it's really, really easy. Just make sure it is not inside the if statements, and then we'll always run this. Long and short of it, if any code is outside of an if statement, it will run. If it's inside an if statement, then it may run if the condition is true, or it won't run if the condition is false. So here's a challenge for you, okay? This time I'm not giving you as much information. So I want you to write a program which will display a single digit in words. So what I mean by that is if I enter a 1, a single digit 1, then it's going to print out the word 1. If I enter a digit 2, it's going to enter the word 2. So here's some examples. Here I've entered the digit 1, so as in the number 1, and then it prints out the word 1. I enter digit 2 and outputs the word 2, and so on and so forth. Now, some tips for this. It's going to follow the same pattern as the previous task you've literally just done. I'm just asking you to adapt it, okay? Some of you might find this really, really easy. Some of you might find it a bit more challenging. You can, if you want to, when you enter the digits, cast it to a number using the int command. However, you don't actually need to for this. If you do cast it, then don't forget that you now have a number, an integer, and you need to compare it to another number. So what I mean by that is your number will not be written like this anymore. Okay, it will just simply be the one without the quotation marks. Okay, that's only if you cast it. If you cast it, use this one. If you don't cast it, use this one. Hopefully that is as clear as mud. Good luck.